أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Your Excellency, the Executive Governor of Sokoto State, Right Honorable Amin Wazir Tambol, His Eminence, the Sultan of Sokoto, our father, the chairman of the occasion, Professor Galadanchi, our Vice Chancellor, our pioneer Vice Chancellor, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. The organizers of this very important occasion requested me to review this book written by our mentor and the teacher, Professor Emeritus Murray Dennis Last. May I request the permission of the chairman to follow suit in saluting the Sultan of Sokoto for this special time and the grant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for witnessing yet another milestone, 15th anniversary as Amirul Mu'mineen of the most egalitarian African state, the Sokoto Caliphate. Allow me also, Mr. Chairman, to congratulate Muslims in Nigeria and West Africa for having a leader trustworthy and fearless, courageous and resourceful at this very trying and challenging time in our history. Muhammad Saad, the Mujaddid of the 21st century. I say this emphatically. In the 19th century, the Mujaddidun left behind to us hundreds of literature. Sultan Muhammad Saad, in the 21st century, committed those literature, translated them, published them, hundreds, and distributed them for free globally. In our little assessment as students of history, our observation of the Sultan is a representative and a blend of the wisdom of Sheikh Usman bin Fodio, the acumen of Sultan Muhammad Bello, and the boldness and the frankness of Malam Abdullahi Gwandu, all in one. One of the most influential world Muslim leaders today. Allah ya ƙara jagora, ya sa a gama lafiya, the Sultan. The author of this book, Emeritus Professor Murray Last, a British historian and anthropologist, started a study of the Sokoto Caliphate as early as 1960 and continues till to date. He informed me that since 1960, there is no year, no period of time which he has not been contributing, writing, and publishing up till now. I thank the organizers for making me a reviewer of the book written by my mentor and the teacher, whose tutelage I enjoy till date. We started meeting at BUK in 1994 while I was working on my master's dissertation on the contributions of Sultan Muhammad Bello in the study, research, and the practice of medical sciences in the 19th century, northern Nigeria. Marilast also encouraged me to continue to study the history of the Caliphate by giving me personally most of his publications related to the subject during my postdoctoral fellowship at SOAS University of London in 2001. Before we start this review, let us ask why, where, and are Europeans, researchers, historians, and anthropologists interested in the study of the Sokoto Caliphate, even if this question will not be attempted at this gathering. The Europeans who study on the Sokoto Caliphate, it is interesting for us to know that Anet, one of the colonial officers, translated the magnum opus of Sultan Muhammad Bello, Infaq al-Maysur, fi Tarikh Bilad al-Takrur, in 1922. He titled it, although we disagree with him, he called the book The Rise of Sokoto Fulani. Whiting translated the same Infaq al-Maysur in 1951. Marvin Hisket translated Tazin al-Waraqat of Abdullahi Fodio in 1963, same as he did to Ida'at al-Nus al-Nusuk Fima Akhastu Anhu Min al-Shiyukh in 1957 by the same author, Malam Abdullahi Fodio. Palmer translated Al-Mustafa's Rawdatul Afkar, written on the history of West Africa as early as 1916. Hodas translated Hajj Sa'id's Tarikh of Sokoto in 1900, and also translated As-Sa'adi's Tarikh al-Sudan, a history about West Africa, a manuscript which was lost in the 15th century but discovered in 1950 in the town of Bandu. Baiva translated Shehu Wasiqat al-Sudan in 1961. In the same vein, Kag Green wrote Adamawa, Past and the Present in 1958. Johnston authored The Fulani Empire of Sokoto in 1975. Hogben authored The Mohammedan Emirate of Northern Nigeria in 1938. Professor Louis Brenner authored The Shehu of Fukawa on the history of Borno, etc., etc. We interrogated their mission and why they ventured into this research elsewhere. It is not, therefore, expedient for us to repeat the same discourse here. But for Professor Marilast, throughout my tutelage under him, I forgot to ask him why did you study, or why are you interested in the study of the Sokoto Caliphate? But after I received this invitation, I gave him a call. I called him. I asked him this question, and he responded to me. He texted to me, and I would like to read his response. He said, the main reason for researching and writing about the Sokoto Caliphate was that histories of Nigeria since 1960, in 1960, all suffered, also referred to the Fulani Empire and told of its conquests and its rulers from outside. As a new student at Ibadan, I'm finding there was a mass of bureaucratic correspondence still kept in Sokoto. It seemed a good idea to study how the empire was actually administered, i.e., to study an office of state, that is a Wizarate, and place it in the context and trace its development. Because there was a newly independent regional government set up in Kaduna, it seemed we had to show that there was a pre-colonial regional government that ran the new state set up by the Shehu in 1808. Thereby, I hope to show that the ideals of the two new governments were not dissimilar. Justice, good administration, security, that is rebirth in 1808, are very important. So I focused on the best element of the Sheikh's government on what could inspire us this 1963 to 1964, when everyone was excited and optimistic. The book was completed in June 1964, but submitted for the award of a PhD in September 1964, though not published till 1967. So the book is very much the product of those pioneering earlier years of Nigeria's independence. I was a guest in flat set by last, with men like Adamu Chiroma in Kaduna and Tahiru Modibo Giri, and we played the monopoly with Gomwak and others. So I drank in their visions of the young civil servant working for the Sardauna's government. It really was exciting. But above all, the Waziri was willing to help me and put up with me. His books and his expertise were all available. He both housed and fed me for a whole year, 1962 to 63. And the HFC Smith was my very strict supervisor. I had to have read everything, or he wanted to know why. So those years, 1961 to 65, were a remarkable period for studying in as much detail as possible the actual government of the major pre-colonial state in Africa, the one which I decided to call for the published book, the Sokoto Caliphate. It gave the world an indication of the scale of that pre-colonial state and eradicated all the label Sokoto Empire in court. Again, all part of the re-understanding of government, both past, Sokoto and the present Kaduna, within the new independent Nigeria. I think, Muktar, that's enough. Murray. I responded, I thank him as being pace-setter and a pillar in the modern study of the history of Sokoto Caliphate. He finally responded by saying, no, that honor, Muktar, belongs solely to Alhaj Junaidu, Wazir in Sokoto, but thanks nonetheless. Murray. Now, my little review of the book. This book was originally a doctoral thesis submitted in the University of Ibadan in September 1964. It was a PhD work on the history of the Sokoto Caliphate as far as we know. It was the first. The initial title was Sokoto in the 19th century, with a special reference to the Vezirate, that is the office of the Wazir in the Sokoto Caliphate. In 1967, it was published into a book and renamed the Sokoto Caliphate. This book has the same chapters and the sub-chapters as contained in the main thesis. If you check the thesis, you will find that there are 3 major chapters all through. And in those 3 major chapters, there are 8 sub-chapters. In chapter 1, he entitled the establishment of Dar al-Islam in Sokoto, 1754 to 1817. We all know the significance of this 1754 and that 1817. 1754 was the death birth of our Sheikh Usman bin Fodio. 1817 was the death of his demise. Under it, he discussed about the formation of the Jama'ah. He discussed about the Hijrah, the Jihad, and also he discussed about the importance of Gondu as the first permanent settlement. Because from 1804, Shehu and his Jama'ah were nomadic, non-settlers moving from one place to another, until they found themselves in Gondu in 1805 and they settled. That was the first settlement. In chapter 2, Professor Marilast identified some of the mechanisms after the establishment of Dar al-Islam. Then how were the Dar al-Islam protected and maintained? So on that, He discussed about the consolidation of the Caliphate and, as expected, the role of Sultan Muhammad Bello and Abu Bakr Atiku, who succeeded him immediately, came to fore. Because Sheikh who formulated the Sokoto Caliphate in theory, Sultan Muhammad Bello actualized it. Sheikh who was the founder, Sultan Muhammad Bello was the architect and the builder. So he translated all what they theorized and put it into practice. So consolidation of the Caliphate first must have to start with the reign and the contribution of Sultan Muhammad Bello. With this, I wish to thank again our Sultan for having the wisdom of writing, sponsoring, publishing a book which he called the Sokoto Sultans in 2016. Before him, there was no document, no single document that has put together the entire sultans of Sokoto from Sheikh Usman bin Fodio to the 30th Sultan Muhammad Saad Abu Bakr. In chapter 3, that is the main chapter, Professor Murelast discussed about the Vizierate, that is the Wazir, the office of the Wazir, starting from 1804 to 1903. In that, he discussed, conceptualized about the office, its historical origin, and he started by giving a brief about Wazir Gidad bin Lema, Amirul Masaleh. And then the Wazir Abdul Qadir, Wazir Ibrahim Khalil, Wazir Abdullahi Bayero, and Wazir Muhammad Buhari, because you remember in the title of the chapter he said 1804 to 1903. Muhammad Buhari, Wazir Buhari, up to 1903. And there also he highlighted on the works of the Wazirs. Their works in Sokoto, their household, their chancery, their works outside Sokoto, their writings, their position. They are followed by a concluding remark, bibliography, and index. The book, I was afraid when I came in, I tried to compare between the revised version and the old version I have. And I found that the publishers tried to maintain even the paging. No change between the old version and the new version. It is only the publication, the printing that has been modernized and colored. So the book has 280 pages main work and 82 preliminary pages, giving a total of 362 pages. The book as it stands now is the most comprehensive, well-researched work. It was translated into Hausa language, sponsored by the author in 2019 and revised in 2020, the volume we are seeing today. This was revised in 2020. And the one interesting thing, as Marilas explained to us, he wanted to digress, to differ. Okay, to differ from the previous European writers. He put the seal. What you are seeing here on the cover page is the official stamp, seal of Sarki Musulmi Muhammad Bello. If Muhammad Bello writes a letter, he will stamp the stamp and make it authentic and official. So by this, by implication, Professor Murelast wanted to authenticate this text by putting the seal of Sultan Muhammad Bello on it. My few little observation as a student of Professor Murelast is that the chapter, the last chapter, shouldn't have been there. Since he changed the name, the title of the book, I'm sure he is following. Since he changed the title, what it was initially, the Sokoto in the 19th century, with a special reference to the office of the Wazir. That was why we have fundamental chapter on the history of the Wazirs. While now, if it is changed to Sokoto Caliphate, then that shouldn't be a main chapter, but instead, the Sokoto Sultan should have been the main chapter to discuss about that. So I'm sure maybe in the next revision, that should take care, that should have been taken care of by the. Finally, Mr. Chairman, Professor Murelast has done his job. He trained us, but what are we doing? My observation is that the essence of presenting this book is for Marilas, a pioneer researcher, to tell us the best he has done and where he stopped, so that the contemporary researchers and the scholars should continue from where he stopped. It is not expected that a book that has been written in 1967 should have been recycling without any, additional information. So in that, my appeal to us, young researchers and the students of Sokoto Caliphate, is to concentrate for in-depth study, especially in the fields of the contribution of the Sokoto Caliphate in sciences and technology, in the history of science and technology. I'm sure, to my knowledge, little knowledge, no European scholar ever ventured into any of this aspect, while we have dozens of literature written on different aspects of sciences, mathematics, geology, geometry, medicine, pharmacy, and the rest. Also, we should have to venture into the contributions of Sokoto Caliphate in agriculture and earth sciences, aspect of good governance, rule of law, and management of pluralism. Not only Nigeria, what the world is longing today is harmonious relationship, the social relationship, intergroup relation. How did Shehu and the founders of the Sokoto Caliphate maintained and retained the peaceful coexistence between hundreds of ethnic groups and religious affiliations without fracas? This is what we should investigate, and we should apply it into practice. We also have a depth of information because the Sokoto Caliphate contributed into higher education. But no European writer has ever mentioned that universities were established in the Sokoto Caliphate. We found that a university was established in Salamehia. It was destroyed by the French powers in 1903. And another university was established in Gwandu. Abdurrahman wrote a book which he called Tartibul Ashab Abdullahi Fodio. In that he enumerated over 700 scholars who were staff of that university, including their names, their affiliation, and the towns they come from. There were also research centers. In fact, Abdullahi Fodio suggested that he wanted to establish laboratory where he will test blood and urine. And he told us in his book Masalihul Insan that hospitals should have been established, or they have established hospitals with departments, especially where you can consult and see the doctors and where people are hospitalized. Applied history, not descriptive history. We should also look into the foreign policy, the foreign affairs in theory and the practice of the Sokoto Caliphate. Also the issue of religious tolerance. One will not imagine the Sokoto as a center of Islamic revivalism in West Africa, but very close to its doors were the pockets of non-Muslims who were surviving and living unharmed. This sent a lot of message that it is not, in the idea of the Islamic Caliphate of Sokoto to annihilate, to eliminate non-Muslim communities. So we need to learn from that. We should also look into the strategies for peace and security, urbanization, industrialization put forward by the Sokoto Caliphate in order to salvage Nigeria and the other African states. Let me conclude, Mr. Chairman, by making appeal that we need to contextualize the relevance of the Sokoto Caliphate structure and the sparse structures in addressing contemporary challenges of today. This should be our new horizon for in-depth research and discourses as a student of the Caliphate, of the history of the Sokoto Caliphate, to complement the great and meritorious work of our father, Professor Emeritus Murray Dennis Last. Thank you very much.
Allahu Akbar. Your Excellency, the book reviewer had stylistically taken care of the next item, comment from the author, and it is directly from the author. As such, we are very much grateful to Professor Muktar Umar Bunza and indeed the Professor Morelas for sending a text comment of his choice for deliberation.